Did you know Georgia has a little Grand Canyon? That wild horses run along a sinking island full of 400-year-old ruins? And there's a swamp where the ground beneath your feet trembles? Georgia isn't just peaches, pine trees, and Atlanta traffic. It's collapsing farmland, moving islands, ancient magma, and rivers that quietly control the future of millions of people. Here are 12 wild facts about Georgia you probably didn't know. The Little Grand Canyon humans accidentally built. In southwest Georgia near the town of Lumpkin, there's a place called Providence Canyon that looks like a mini version of the Grand Canyon, towering jagged walls of red, orange, pink, and white sand dropping up to 150 feet. It feels ancient, but most of this canyon formed in just the last couple of centuries, and humans did it. In the 1800s, settlers cleared the native forests and plowed their fields straight up and down the hills with no erosion control. Georgia's soft, sandy soils and heavy rains did the rest. Shallow ruts turned into gullies, gullies turned into ravines, ravines kept growing deeper and wider with every storm. In less than 200 years, careless farming practices helped carve out an entire Badlands landscape. Geologists are clear, without that farming, Providence Canyon simply would not exist the way it does today. It's one of the most dramatic examples anywhere in the US of how fast we can rewrite the land when we don't understand it. An island of wild horses that's slowly slipping into the sea. Off Georgia's coast lies Cumberland Island, the state's largest barrier island. It looks like a movie set. Long empty beaches, dunes, and wild horses roaming around the ruins of old mansions. But this beautiful place is also disappearing. Barrier islands are long, narrow piles of sand built by waves and currents. They protect the mainland from storms, but they're constantly shifting, eroding in some areas and growing in others. On Cumberland Island, rising sea levels and repeated storms are chewing away at the shoreline. Old structures from the Gilded Age, like the crumbling Dungeness Mansion, are slowly being reclaimed by sand, salt, and vines. Over decades, the whole island is inching inland and changing shape. The wild horses don't care, they just keep grazing. But for humans, it's a quiet warning that even land that feels solid is on the move. A swamp so big, the ground literally trembles. In the deep south of Georgia, straddling the border with Florida, lies the Okefenokee Swamp, 700 square miles of one of the wildest wetland systems in North America. Its native name is often translated as Land of the Trembling Earth. That's not poetry, it's a description. Much of it is made of layers of partially rotted plants floating on water. When you step onto it, the ground actually shakes beneath your feet. Trees, shrubs, and whole patches of bog gently bounce as the peat flexes. The swamp is a maze of blackwater channels, cypress trees, carnivorous plants, and thousands of alligators. Wildfires sometimes burn on its surface for weeks. Other times, heavy rains turn it into an endless sheet of water. To most people, Georgia is highways and suburbs. To the Okefenokee, it's still a primeval swamp where the land itself feels alive. A huge earthquake zone nobody expects in the deep south. When Americans think of big earthquakes, they think of California or Alaska, not Georgia. But in 1886, a massive earthquake struck near Charleston, South Carolina, in a seismic zone that reaches into eastern Georgia. It's estimated to have been around a magnitude 7 quake. Shaking was felt from New York to Cuba. In Georgia, cities like Savannah and Augusta reported chimneys collapsing, walls cracking, and people running into the streets in panic. Some brick buildings still show old reinforcing rods and bands added afterward to keep them from falling apart if it happened again. The shaking came from the Charleston Seismic Zone, an ancient fault system buried deep in the crust far from any plate boundary. Even today, small earthquakes occasionally rattle eastern Georgia. There's no dramatic surface fault to visit, but the risk is real. It's a reminder that the solid, old rocks of the eastern US can still move violently even after millions of years of seeming quiet. A granite iceberg rising outside Atlanta. Just east of Atlanta, Stone Mountain rises more than 800 feet above the surrounding forests, a huge gray dome visible from miles away. What you see is just the tip. Stone Mountain is part of a much larger granite pluton, a blob of magma that cooled slowly underground hundreds of millions of years ago. Over time, softer surrounding rocks eroded away, leaving the hard granite sticking up like the exposed top of a buried iceberg. Rainwater runs off its smooth slopes so quickly that only tiny pockets of soil can form. In those pockets, rare plants cling to life in shallow islands of green on bare rock. From the summit, on a clear day, you can see the Atlanta skyline floating on the horizon. Glass and steel towers perched on bedrock that began as molten rock deep within the earth. The carving on the side is controversial and recent. The mountain itself is ancient geology slowly forcing its way out as everything around it wears down. A fossil beach stranded in the middle of the state. In the center of Georgia, near towns like Butler and Reynolds, you can walk through rolling hills of sand and scrub pine that feel more like the Florida Panhandle than the red clay many people picture. This belt of land is part of the Fall Line Sandhills, a leftover from when the Atlantic shoreline lay much farther inland. Millions of years ago, sea levels were higher and waves crashed along what is now central Georgia. Rivers dipped sand into shallow coastal waters, building beaches and narrow offshore bars. As sea levels fell, those old shorelines were left behind. Wind and water reworked them into dry inland dunes. Today, gopher tortoises dig burrows into the soft sand. Longleaf pines grow where ocean waves once broke. It's essentially a fossil beach, stranded about 100 miles from the modern shore. A short coastline that's secretly huge. On a classroom map, Georgia's coastline looks simple and short, just a small curve between South Carolina and Florida. But the real shoreline is anything but simple. Georgia's coast is lined with salt marshes, tidal creeks, and twisting estuaries. The Altamaha, Satilla, and Savannah rivers don't just hit the ocean and stop. They spread out into wide fans of channels, mudflats, and marsh grass. If you trace every bend, inlet, and creek edge, the true length of Georgia's shoreline explodes. Mathematicians call this a fractal effect. The more you zoom in on the wiggly edges, the more coastline you find. So while Georgia only claims about 100 miles of front on the Atlantic, the total environment where land and sea mix is far larger and more complex than it looks on a flat map. A capital city perched on a knife edge between two oceans. Atlanta feels like the center of gravity in Georgia. Geographically, it also sits near a subtle but important watershed divide. Rain falling on the west side of Atlanta flows into the Chattahoochee River, then into the Apalachicola River, and eventually reaches the Gulf of Mexico. Rain falling just to the east heads towards rivers like the Ocmulgee and the Oconee, feeding the Altamaha and other streams that empty into the Atlantic Ocean. That means Metro Atlanta sits on a kind of rooftop. Water choices here, how much is stored, how much is used, how clean it is when it leaves, affect not just Georgia, but Florida and Alabama downstream on one side and coastal ecosystems on the other. It's one of the reasons water wars over lake levels and river flows have been so intense. Atlanta doesn't just dominate the state economically, it sits at the top of two giant drainage systems. A hidden gorge once called the Niagara of the South. In northeast Georgia, near the town of Tallulah Falls, the Tallulah River has carved a deep, narrow canyon known as Tallulah Gorge. Over a distance of about 2 miles, the river drops through a series of waterfalls and rapids, with cliffs rising up to 1,000 feet above the water in some places. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Tallulah Gorge was a major tourist attraction, sometimes called the Niagara of the South. Hoteliers built viewpoints along the rim. Daredevils walked tightropes over the chasm. Later, dams upstream diverted much of the river's flow for hydropower, taming the falls. But on certain scheduled days, extra water is released and the river surges back through the gorge closer to its natural power. For a short time, you get a glimpse of the Georgia waterfall system that once roared here every day, taller in total drop than the main falls at Niagara, just hidden in dense forest. A river that helped shape Georgia's history. Along Georgia's eastern border, the Savannah River forms much of the line between Georgia and South Carolina, but it's more than just a political boundary. The Savannah marks part of Georgia's fall line, where hard upland rock meets softer coastal plain sediments. As the river drops off this invisible step, it's used to form rapids and small waterfalls, perfect for early industry. The city of Augusta grew up here, just like Macon on the Ocmulgee and Columbus on the Chattahoochee did along their own fall line drops. These fall line cities became key trade and manufacturing hubs. Boats could come up from the coast only to the rapids, and mills could tap the falling water for power. So a subtle change in bedrock helped decide where Georgia's major cities would rise and where its border would be drawn. A tiny slice of the Appalachians that controls a lot of water. In Georgia's northwest and northeast corners, the Appalachian Mountains dip into the state, bringing ridges, folded valleys, and some of the highest points in Georgia. The tallest of all is Brasstown Bald, at 4,784 feet above sea level. From its summit on a clear day, you can see into 4 states: Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. The air is cooler, the forests shift to more northern-style species. In winter, you might even see rye mice on trees, while the lowlands are just chilly rain. These mountains aren't just scenic, they are the headwaters for many important Georgia rivers, including the Chattahoochee. A small area of high, wet ground in North Georgia quietly controls the water supply for millions of people to the south. Georgia, a simple shape hiding a wild story. On a basic map, Georgia looks like a fairly simple block of land in the southeastern United States. Up close, it's one of the most quietly extreme states in the country. After hearing these 12 wild facts about Georgia, which one shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments and see how many other people chose the same one. If we missed a Georgia secret you think deserves a spot, add it below. Your ideas help make every video better. Subscribe and give this one a like so we can keep exploring the hidden side of the map together.